Aenig by Cáel. Chapter 29. It hadn't surprised Indy over the last week and some change how worried Max had been about Cáel. The scout was the guy's one chance of being normal again. What had astonished and continued to fascinate her was how gentle the creature was with him. Ever since her rescue, she'd only seen the hard, frankly dickish side to Cáel. Despite Trix's assertions, people treated him with, albeit necessary, caution and disdain, and the scout took just about every chance he got to prove them right. The arrogant, self-serving, egotistical prick was the most infuriating human being she had ever met. So it came as a complete surprise to her that Cáel 6 was a cuddler. It was simply the funniest thing. The sheer amount of times she turned her back for a minute, only to find the man wrapped around a pillow or a snoring memph when she turned back. Even if Max was a decent, albeit clingy guy, his memph form was still pretty terrifying, and the scout was using him like a damn teddy bear. She let herself think about Max, covered in brown fuzz once, but the image was more disturbing than it was entertaining. Maybe someone on this hunk of metal, brick and glass had a camera she could borrow. A loud sneeze drew her from her imaginings, and Max sniffed hard. "Are you getting sick?" she asked, crouching down to reach for his forehead. He was warm, but he always had been. Marcus had hypothesized that memfs ran hotter than humans, but it was all just guesswork, seeing as he would only work on them if they were no longer drawing breath. "I don't get sick," Max replied from his seat on the floor. "Maybe the shifts are making your immune system low," she suggested. "You're not really sleeping." "Is that a thing?" he asked expectantly. "I don't know. I'm not a memph doctor." She chuckled, and Max cracked a smile back. It was a start. With every day that Cáel refused to recover, the man had become steadily more and more depressed. The scout hadn't had a convulsion in over 22 hours, but he still slept an abnormal amount of time between moments of lucidity. "I'm sorry." The soft apology barely made it across the space that separated them. "For what?" she asked gently. Max curled in on himself. "I lied." Indy stared at him blankly. She couldn't think of anything Max had said so far which hadn't been. "I didn't get sick as a human," he explained, his words half muffled as he spoke them into the arms hanging over his curled knees. "I mean, I was quite healthy until the accident. I'd been out drinking with my brother. He was driving and then this truck came out of nowhere." He struggled to finish, and Indy could see where the story led, and it wasn't one with a happy ending. Max sniffed back tears as he continued. "I went into surgery as a man and I woke up a monster." The chuckle that left him was hollow and took far too much energy for what it was worth. "I wasn't a very healthy monster." The girl said nothing. The man hadn't spoken about his first transformation before. Not to her, at least. She'd heard him murmuring to Cáel's unconscious body at night, when he thought she was asleep, but the one-sided conversations were always too soft for her to follow with any understanding. "I didn't eat with the others," Max explained. "Never went hunting for our natural prey. I ate mostly dogs and cats, and the others..." He sighed deeply, and Indy wondered if he was even speaking to her anymore. "I think they could sense there was something different about me. They didn't like me, especially when I got sick. They didn't want to be around me, even the Guardians. If we were in danger, they wouldn't protect me. Hell, half the time it was a miracle to be sick. They would need something that infected." "I'm sorry you had to be alone," she sympathized. Indy had had her family, and the whole thing had still been torture. She didn't even want to imagine what it must have been like to go through it on her own. I wasn't alone. Max smiled, and it was the most genuine she'd seen on his face in days. She always looked after me. His eyes were far away, and the joy seemed hesitant, but it was real. She? The girl asked. Yes, Max answered, coming back to her. Despite everything, I was hers. She kept me warm when the fever got bad, even forced me to eat properly when I was too weak to resist. I don't know why, but she took care of me. Who is she? Cáel grumbled from the nest of blankets that had accumulated around him. You're awake! Max cheered. He was on the scout in a blur, checking him over, even though he had no idea what he was looking for. How long have you been listening? Ndi asked, when she rose from her haunches. Long enough, the man murmured lazily, but he zoned back in on Max. Who was she? This man could be so single-minded at times. I guess you could say that she was like our mother. Max willingly handed over to his favorite person. She talks to us, helped us build a home. She could be nice sometimes. The way he said it made the hair on Ndi's arms stand on end. Sometimes? She asked hesitantly. If we displeased her, she would discipline us, Max mumbled, as though he'd just been scolded. Ndi imagined that the discipline he spoke of was a little more severe than the thrashing she remembered once her father caught her wandering around after dark. Us? Cáel snapped aggressively. This pronoun game is getting old. Still single-minded and without concern for the man who'd been worrying over him the most. Oh, how Ndi would love to clout him like the toddler he often pretended to be. I'm not explaining myself well, am I? Max sagged under the interrogation. He looked so heartbroken that he wasn't making any sense. What you're explaining is a hierarchy, a feminine voice offered from the doorway. Thrisha stood there, with a plate piled high of food. For once, neither man jumped for the opportunity to stuff their face. What are you doing here? Ndi asked bluntly. There was no way Max was going to continue talking now. If there was one thing she learned about the man, in the short time she'd known him, it was that he didn't like strangers. He'd only begun to trust her once Cáel had threatened to kill him, and Dylan had to bring food for a whole 6 meals before Max didn't go sniffing every time he entered the room. He still didn't entirely trust either Silas or Maish, though he couldn't be blamed for that, if she took into account the amount of times each had threatened to shoot him. Speaking of which, where the hell were they? Dylan's overseeing a mission that is taking longer than expected, so he asked me to come, the forager stammered out, not moving from her spot at the door, but she didn't seem to want to leave either. It would make sense, Cáel grumbled, as he sat up slowly. The blankets fell around his waist, and his hair stuck up at all odd angles. They have always travelled in packs. I wouldn't call our greater family a pack, Max countered with a shake of his head. There were some outsiders who do, but most of them died out over the years. He seemed saddened by that, but Ndi couldn't understand why. You could say that we work the same way you do, Max tried to explain. Our foragers are more like hunters, but the guardians go out with them to make sure they'll be safe if they're attacked by another family. She would give us our tasks and nature sorted out the rest. They operate like a hive. Thrisha breathed, and her eyes lit up with interest. The 3 occupants stared at her in surprise, so she slowly stepped forward as she explained her theory. In a beehive, there is a queen who runs it, the soldiers who protect it, and the workers who do everything else. Yes, Max nodded, as a similarity sunk in. Only the workers are soldiers and the soldiers are guardians. So that thing that attacked us only did so because Cáel attacked the soldiers? Thrisha hummed. Hey, the scout defended, They attacked me first. It was self-defense. Oh, please, the forager sighed irritatedly. You take pride in the fact that every living thing on this planet considers you a threat. You would kick a wounded puppy if it looked at you wrong. What did you do to tick her off? 3 sets of eyes landed heavily on Ndi for interrupting. She returned the stares with an unapologetic shrug. What? I didn't do anything, Cáel grumbled. Ndi rolled her eyes at him. I wasn't talking about you. She reached up to pat Max's hand to get his attention. You said you were hiding from a guardian when Cáel found you, she reminded him. Because they were going to eat you, you said they needed permission to eat their own kind. What did you do? Max shuddered and subconsciously inched closer to the scout, even as he told her what had happened. Food was getting scarce, and the Guardians had already consumed a good portion of our hive. He looked to Thrisha for confirmation, but he barely let her nod before he pressed on. We were all hungry, and I didn't hunt. I was the weakest link. His gaze dropped to the floor in shame. It made sense that I should sacrifice myself for the protection of the family. But you ran, Ndi realized. Yes, Max affirmed her guess, only the guilt in his tone was unmistakable, as though surviving was something to be ashamed of. I didn't want to die, he whispered so softly. We need to tell Damien about this, Cáel said resolutely, as he began attempting to untangle himself from the blankets around his legs. If the memfs are organized, he should know. I'm sure he already knows, Ndi reprimanded. How could you fight them for so many years and not realize that they were organized? You were out there, did you notice anything? The man shouted back. I'll tell him, Thrisha offered, if only to get the hell out of there. The last time the two of them had fought, Cáel had brought home a freak of nature. Also because a loud crack signaled the beginning of Max's reverse transformation. I'll come with you, Ndi huffed with a glare at the men under her care. If you two fight while I'm gone, you'd better kill each other. No, she wasn't jealous. Max still preferred Cáel over her.